Good afternoon, golfing fans. Welcome back to the channel, proudly sponsored by betting.co.uk. So, I'm just back with some selections for this week's DP World Tour event. We've got the Irish Open taking place at one of the best golf courses on the planet. We have Royal County Down hosting the 2024 Irish Open. And this is sure to be a really entertaining event to watch. You won't be finding a real low score winning this week, as 2 under was the best score in 2015. And I've got a couple of selections that I think are going to go really well here for you to take a look at. Now, it is going to take a really unique sort of player to win this week. You can't just look at the top of the leaderboard and find the players that are hitting it a long way, the guys that are high up in the world rankings, etc., etc. There's actually a few attributes that I think are really important to focus on this week, which I will go on to in a moment. Now, if you're new to my channel, welcome. I do appreciate you tuning in. And just a little bit of a background about myself. I'm an ex-tour professional, so I've had some playing experience. I'm now trying to put that to good use, trying to find you the winners for the golf event each week. Now, we are on a little bit of a roll at the moment. We have had profit in the last 2 weeks. And last year across Twitter and YouTube, I was the second highest ranked golf tipster across those platforms. So hopefully the experience that I've had as a player is going to be put to good use. And I've got a few players this week that I do have in mind. I'll also give you a couple of long shots to consider as well if you like the bigger prices too. Okay, so this week's event, as I said, takes place at Royal County Down. This is a par 71 over 7,186 yards with just the three par fives to contend with. And again, this is actually a really, really tough course. So you won't find a low scoring event. The players are really going to be put to the test throughout the 18 holes over the 4 days as well. And it should be a really entertaining watch. It's so difficult that in 2015, which was the last time the Irish Open was hosted at Royal County Down, the winning score was just 2 under par. I do think it's going to be lower than that this time around because the weather doesn't look too bad actually this week, but still, nonetheless, you need a lot of things to go your way this season. Okay, so my first player this week is actually going to be a really consistent performer. In fact, let's go into a few of the attributes first that you need this week. A lot of people will tell you to focus on being good off the tee. Okay, that is probably going to be fairly essential with the way that the fairways work here, very undulating. But even if you hit one down the middle here, you're not guaranteed to find yourself in the fairway with so many undulations. For me, the main stat to focus on for the stat lovers is greens in regulation, because those hitting the greens around here are the ones that are going to get more birdie opportunities. And to be honest, pars are actually your friend around Royal County Down. So I don't mind if you're in the rough off the tee too much. As long as they're hitting their irons well into these greens, they're going to be having really good opportunities. If you want to dissect those stats a little bit more rather than just looking at green and regulation stats, players that hit the half shots with their irons and players that control their trajectory well and their distance well will fare much, much better this week. There's a few players that I've got on my list to avoid and players that I really like. For instance, you could say Guido Migliozzi. He's a player that hits full shots with his irons all the time. I imagine he's going to struggle around here unless things go his way for 72 holes, because hitting full shots around this golf course doesn't always bode well. You really need to be controlling those irons into these greens to find those flat spots, and you need quite a creative short game as well. So, for instance, Guido Migliozzi is probably a player that I'm not too interested in. Something that is interesting, though, regarding the Irish Open is the last 7 events, despite being at different golf courses, the winners have all been faders of the ball. And again, that would correlate to what I'm saying, because faders of the ball generally control the ball flight and their distance control better. It's what you'd call a stock shot. It's easier to repeat. Whereas those hitting a draw have to do more with their hands, more with their wrist, and more with the golf swing in general, which is just harder to be consistent. So for me, green in regulation is, of course, important. But if you can find players that do well with their half shots and, of course, control their trajectory and distance well, I think you will find yourself heavily involved at the deep end with your selections. With that being said, selection number one for me is going to be Bernd Wiesberger, who actually has a really good record in this event, even at other golf courses. And last time that he actually played here in 2015, he finished second. But since then, he's actually won 6 more DP World Tour title events, which is obviously going to bode well for him. He's a really consistent sort of player. Very, very good with his irons. Again, you see a lot of half shots being hit by Bernd. And again, what I like about him is that he controls his distance very, very good too. Now, of course, the short game is very important as well. You need a bit of creativity around here. And for the most part, he's quite solid. Don't get me wrong, he has a few weeks where the short game doesn't quite click, but that is for the same with most players, to be honest. So again, the first most important thing is that distance control trajectory. He hits a nice soft fade with his irons. I imagine he's going to be hitting plenty of greens. And those that don't make too many mistakes around here are the players that I think are going to do really well. So for me, Bernd Wiesberger is definitely one to have on side for this week. He's actually achieved 12 top 25 finishes this year, and that actually includes several top 10 finishes as well. So he's playing really well. He's been nice and consistent, hitting plenty of greens, and that actually makes him my number one pick this week. Now, you can get 28 to 1 with Ladbrokes and Coral for the 10 places, and you can get about 33 to 1, 35 to 1 for 7 or 8 places elsewhere. But even though you're taking quite a hit on the odds this week, I would go in search of places first and foremost, simply due to the difficulty of this golf course. You really can chuck in a double bogey at any time around here. So Bernd Wiesberger, 28 to 1 with Ladbrokes and Coral is selection number one. Consistent, good ball striker, very good with his irons, hits a lot of greens in regulation, a pretty decent short game to go with it. I don't see why, on paper at least, Bernd shouldn't get heavily involved for this week's tournament. Now, selection number two is a player I don't think I've ever tipped up before at 33 to 1, but that is Erik van Rooyen, who I think is absolutely primed to play well this week. And considering he doesn't have a lot of links golf experience, he seems to go and play really well when he gets into these sort of events. I actually watched him play at the Scottish Open. Of course, not too dissimilar to this one in the sense that you've got undulating fairways, tricky greens as well. And again, similar attributes are required to go and win there. Distance control, good iron play, a soft sort of ball shape, shot shape, sorry. And Erik van Rooyen just ticks all of those boxes. He's a very consistent sort of player. Again, that's something that I quite like for this week, and he should go really well. Now, along with those attributes, he does actually hit a lot of half shots, Van Rooyen. He's actually quite similar to Guido Migliotti in the way they play, quite aggressive. However, Erik van Rooyen does have those half shots in the bag, and that's going to bode really well for him this week. Very important to keep that ball under control, and he's going to do that plenty of times as well. Now, going back to the Scottish Open as well, he was right in contention after 3 rounds in the 60s before shooting. I think it was 74 in the final round. But overall, he had a really good tournament. And even though he shot 74 in the last round, it wasn't like he fell apart as such. He had a few unlucky breaks, hit a few bunkers in spots where he wasn't able to obviously attack from there. He had to chip out sideways, and then had a few unlucky breaks on the green. So it wasn't anything on the basis that he played poorly. He just didn't quite get the rub of the greens that day. But I think he actually played really well on the whole that week with 3 rounds in the 60s. I think it went 66, 64, 67, which is really consistent golf when you consider the difficulty of the links courses that they are playing. So you get 33 to 1 for Erik van Rooyen. Again, 10 places. I think it's essential you go for places over prices this week. And I think Bernd Wiesberger and Erik van Rooyen will go very close indeed. Certainly be heavily involved in the deep end. Now, I'm going to chuck a couple of long shots at you as well for this week, because there's some players at bigger prices that could well go and outplay their odds. Now, usually I like to give you a 400, 500 to 1 shot to look at. But this week I've got 125 to 1 and 175 to 1 shot for you to take a second look at. The first of which is actually going to be Dan Brown, a player who's very, very hit and miss, but on his day he's extremely talented and has, of course, now broken his maiden. He's now a winner on the DP World Tour, and he's played pretty good in some decent events since then as well, most notably in the Open Championship, where he finished 10th. He was leading heading into the final round. And similar to Erik van Rooyen at the Scottish Open, things just didn't necessarily fall for him that day. He didn't make enough putts, perhaps okay, but he had a few bad luck shots sort of coming into the fairways, and his approach is getting the wrong side of perhaps a slight mound. And again, that just made it much more difficult to keep that score intact. But he played really well. He's a really good, consistent ball striker. He hits those half shots as well. And even when Dan Brown actually hits a full shot, he doesn't actually seem to hit them 100%. He's sort of like an 80% golf shot sort of player, even at the best of times. So he's plenty controlled in with his irons, and I think he could go really well. He's been a little bit out of form recently, but again, nothing too drastic. And at 125 to 1, he could surely be a player that could go and outplay his odds. And I'd actually probably consider him for a first round leader selection as well, even though it's not really a market that I focus on. And then my second long shot would actually be Ross Fisher at 175 to 1. He tied 12th in the Czech Masters after playing quite well in the BMW International a couple of weeks ago as well. And he's sort of a player that's starting to trend in the right way. He lost his sort of form a few times in the last couple of years, but I like the way he's been playing this year. He probably does hit the ball a little bit higher than I'd like, but he's very consistent with it. So I would give him a shout based on how big his odds are. And if you're looking at the fact you'll get 17.5 to 1 just for a top 10 finish, I think he is well worth a second look. The high winds here are not likely to come until the weekend by the looks of the forecast. But even then, providing the fact that Ross Fisher should be playing well up until that point, provided things go to plan, then I don't think he's going to be too far away as well. He doesn't make too many mistakes either. Perhaps doesn't make too many putts going through the first half of the season, but again, that's something that has progressed since. So the fact that he's been really consistent with his irons, he's now starting to make a few more putts as well. I think he's going to have a really good shot. And 175 to 1 probably is a bit of a discredit to his ability when he brings his A game, which is, of course, what I am focusing on with my selections this week. So just to recap, my top two selections, Bernd Wiesberger at 28 to 1 and Eric Van Rooyen at 33 to 1. But a couple of long shots for you are Dan Brown at 125 to 1 and Ross Fisher at 175 to 1 to go with it. Now, hopefully we can have a good week. Drop me a comment below with who you fancy for this week's selection. And if you'd like some more content, a preview to the tournament, play a list of high-profile players to avoid, which I've got an extremely good record with, more content in general, attributes to focus on, and a group chat to go with it. Come over and join my group using the link in the description below. If I don't see you there, I will see you this time next week once again. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you all real soon.